Hello and welcome back to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Mayer. Before we dive into today's episode, let me remind you to check out our website at themfgconnector.com and follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stay connected with all things manufacturing and culture. Don't forget about our other show, The Manufacturing Connector, on YouTube. If you're into problem solving and solutions that push the industry forward, that's a show for you. Now, let me introduce you to today's guest. And trust me, you're going to love this one. Imagine discovering your passion for programming at just 12 years old, coding away on a Commodore 64 in your bedroom, and turning that spark into a career that's transforming the future of manufacturing. That's exactly what our guest, Bryan DeBois, did. He's the director of industrial AI at Rova-Sys, where he's not just talking about the future, he's actively building it. Bryan's journey is a unique one. He spent over 20 years at the same company, which is a rarity in today's world. And he's evolved from a fresh college grad who loved to code to a leader guiding teams and pushing the boundaries of what's possible within AI in manufacturing. But don't let his title fool you. Bryan is more than just a tech genius. He's a people developer who finds just as much joy in mentoring fresh talent as he does in creating cutting edge AI solutions. In today's conversation, we're going to explore Bryan's fascinating career path from his early days building manufacturing execution systems to leading an entire AI division that's transforming the way manufacturers operate. We'll get into how he overcame his initial reluctance to take on leadership roles and how he's navigated strategic shifts in the industry. And of course, his philosophy on AI and its role in shaping the future of manufacturing. So buckle up, listeners, and let's get ready for an episode packed with insights, tech talk, and inspiring leadership lessons. Let's dive into Bryan's story. Welcome to the Manufacturing Culture Podcast, Bryan. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on this. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while now. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped too, man. I really enjoyed our pre-interview chat. It was a good conversation. It was notes and talk about AI. Zoom, the summary on Zoom, it was like a page and a half of notes just on our conversation. It was a really good one. So looking forward to this. Bryan, just like every episode and the way I start, I want to hear your stories. Let's start from the beginning. What sparked that initial interest in programming as a kid, and how did that lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, so man, it goes back to, my late grandpa, he was a guy that could fix anything. And in particular, he was big into cars, and he could take apart cars and put them back together. And he spent his whole career working on cars. And in a lot of ways, I see parallels from that generation because that was kind of their technology, right? And they were very passionate about it. And and he would restore these antique cars, and it was unbelievable what he could do. Well, he comes home one day, and someone at his work was getting rid of their Commodore 64. Now we're talking about, this is in the early 90s. So even then it was old.
Yeah.
And they were getting rid of it, but they had everything. They had the original Commodore 64, they had the printer, they had the drives, they had tons of books to go with it. It was in a big plastic tub. I mean, literally the guy was like, hey, do you think your grandson might be interested in this? So he brings it home and he plops it down, and he doesn't know anything about it. And he's like, hey, here you go. If you want to mess around with it, if you don't, let me know. I'll just junk it. And so I hooked the thing up and I start to mess around with it. And one of the books in this tub was programming the Commodore 64. And it was the programming language at the time was BASIC. Okay. And so that was what I learned on BASIC. And again, I'm 12 years old and I'm just kind of messing around with this thing. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. And so, I mean, when I would go out and I remember we would go out to restaurants and, my brother would be drawing or whatever on the, on the placemat, and I would be writing code. Like that was just, I don't know. And to me, it just seemed normal. Like that was my passion, was I wrote code, and I wrote code constantly. I filled pages after pages of notebooks with code. Now, half of it probably didn't work, but I was working through the problems, right? And I was learning to think like a programmer. And so then from there, that took me all the way into high school. And then in high school, I enrolled in every programming course that they offered. And so I was very fortunate in that regard, in that I really went into high school knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a programmer. There was just no question in my mind. And so then I also made sure that I took all of, now at the time they called it post-secondary. I think it's got a different name now, but basically where you can take college courses in high school.
Yeah.
For college credit. And so I took all of those that were offered. And
Wow.
so then by the time I got into college, again, I was fortunate in that I wasn't doing kind of the exploratory thing. Like, I don't really know what I want to do. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I knew all I needed was the piece of paper from the college that said, yes, this person knows how to code. Because that, I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. You know, I was able to get through that relatively quickly to get through college. And then I was also very fortunate in college to meet my employer that I still work at today. And so I was at a career fair, and it's funny because I was dating my now wife at the time. So she was my girlfriend, and hanging out at her apartment. And, you know, I was like, man, I really don't want to go to this career fair today. And she was like, you need to get your rear to this career fair. So put on a tie, go to this career fair and meet some of these companies, because, you know, it's not enough to know what you want to do. You got to find some place that you can actually do it. So, and I was very fortunate to meet Rova-Sys, my current employer there, and had a great conversation. And from there, I started my co-op there in 2000, or here in 2000. And then I co-op for 2 years. And then in 2002, I graduated college from the University of Akron. 3 things happened that year. I graduated college, I started at Rova-Sys, and I married my wife. And I'm still
It's a big year.
holding strong on all those things. Yeah. So I've been here for really now 24 years, if you count that co-op time. And it's been a great company to work for. But I started out, so when I started, I was programming. So while I knew, you know, a lot about programming and coding and things like that, I really knew nothing about the manufacturing sector.
Okay.
All I knew was what I had seen on the show How It's Made. And I was fascinated by that, right? I mean, it was so interesting to see, you know, what goes on inside of these factories that provide all the things that we just kind of take for granted. Like, how do you actually make this stuff? And so that was my only experience. And so it's been, I've loved that aspect of my job. I still get excited even 20 plus years later to go into these factories. I am absolutely still fascinated about the processes that it takes to actually create the things that we use every day. And so I learned the manufacturing side of this whole thing. And as we talked about in my early days, we were still things like, if your listeners aren't familiar, manufacturing execution systems. So these are the big software systems. They live above the controls, but they live below kind of the ERP and financial systems. And that wasn't a thing. You couldn't just go out and buy a manufacturing execution system or MES system. So we were still building those from scratch. And so I spent a lot of time doing those types of projects, building visualizations, building integrations between, you know, there's so much data coming from the plant floor. I like to say that we were doing big data on the plant floor before there was even a term for it, right? Because there was just the volume of data coming from the plant floor. When you look at the other thing, I was doing a lot of projects around what are called historians, which, if your listeners aren't familiar, these are big time series databases.
Wow.
So they don't store transactional data like a SQL or relational database. They store data along the index of time. And so on the plant floor, we've had historians since the 80s. And they were storing huge volumes of data. Now, the way that they do it is they use a trick. They use lossy compression. So similar to how a JPEG compresses a picture, you lose some fidelity. That's actually how historians have been able to store large volumes of process data from the plant floor. Even in the 80s, when 100 megs was a lot of storage, right?
Wow.
They were able to do that. And so in the early 2000s, we were still selling people on the idea of why you needed a historian on the plant floor. They're like, well, we just throw this data out. And we were trying to convince them, now imagine nowadays, but we're trying to convince them of the value of data.
Yeah.
You're going to want this data. Don't throw it out. And so we were still doing those types of projects where we were convincing customers, we were selling them on the idea of holding on to this data. Nowadays, you fast forward 20 years and everyone has a historian, and they typically have multiple historians. So those were the types of projects that I was involved in. And then from there, you know, I'm doing these projects. And then from there, I kind of move into a technical lead role. I still remember the first project that I ever was the technical lead on and the architecture that I put together for that. Still kind of proud of it. And then, I moved from there into project management. So now I'm managing these primarily, software related projects in this manufacturing space. And so that was where, I got into this PM role. And then from there, the question was kind of posed to me, hey, have you thought about managing people? Now that was kind of, for me, it was kind of a little bit of a bridge too far. I felt like, managing projects, even account relationships with customers, that all I kind of grew into from the technical. It was kind of a natural extension of the technical. But managing people just felt kind of different for some reason. And it also was, when you move into that role of managing people, you do say goodbye in a lot of ways to most of the technical aspect of your job. And I think that that's kind of a natural progression, but it's also something that you kind of mourn for that. So anyway, the first time they asked, I said no. I said, I appreciate you thinking of me. I'm flattered, but I just don't think that's the direction I want to go. I just want to stay with the technical. I really love this aspect. It's all I ever wanted to do. And so I passed on it. And it wasn't until a couple years later, and it was actually, I remember it was 2010, and I had just had my twins. So at this point, I had 3 kids now. And, I loved this company. And I said, if I'm going to stick around here, which, at this point, it's like, I've got kids, I've got all the reasons in the world now to put down roots and say, this is where I'm going to be. I said, I don't just want to be a passenger on the ship. I want to kind of help guide this ship. And so, I said, okay, I approached them and I said, I know you've been asking me over and over again. And I kept saying no, but I think I now want to be put into consideration for management. Now, what's interesting, and this is a lesson that I teach, some of the folks who work for me, is that sometime that opportunity train comes, and you may not feel like you're ready for it. And that's okay. And it's okay to say, if you're truly not ready for it, it's okay to say no to that. But you got to remember that train may not come back around for a while. And so that's what happened, right? So 2010, I said, well, now I feel like I'm ready. Well, we had just come off of the Great Recession. We weren't doing a ton of hiring at the time. We weren't really promoting managers at the time. And so it was 2.5 years later, it was 2013 when we did a big promotion of a bunch of GMs, and I was in that wave of GMs being group managers. I was in that wave. So yeah, sometimes you never know when the opportunity is going to come back around, and you do kind of have to take that in consideration when things are presented to you. So anyway, I got into management, and there's all kinds of challenges that we can talk about that come with managing people, right? But there was a couple of insights that I didn't expect. One is that my technical training and my technical expertise, I didn't anticipate how well that would translate in some ways. So like there are different kinds of problems when you're managing people and when you're managing customers and when you're managing budgets, and there are different types of problems, but the knowledge that you have about how to solve technical problems actually does kind of translate. One of the things that is unique amongst, I think, companies like us is that everyone in Rova-Sys in management was once an engineer or developer. Wow. So we all have a technical background. Some of us have augmented those skills with MBAs and things like that, but we all have a technical degree. We all came up through the ranks. And honestly, now that I've worked at a company like this, I don't know how else you could, if it's a technical company, I don't know how else you could do it, right? Because we do know what it's like. And we never ask anyone to do anything that we wouldn't have done ourselves when we were on the front lines and we were that person. So, but the other aspect of it is honestly, who better to run your company than a bunch of problem solvers? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're really good at identifying problems and solving them, even if they're business problems. So that was the one thing I didn't anticipate. But the other thing I didn't anticipate was how much I fell in love with this idea of developing people. And it checks a similar box. It hits similarly to designing some amazing architecture, software architecture, and laying it out, this perfect architecture, and then seeing it come into existence, into reality, which I always had loved about programming. There's something similar about that when you get to develop somebody and you watch their career go and you set these goals for them that they achieve and then exceed. And then you continue to challenge them and you continue to set high expectations for them and they continue to exceed. So I've been at this now. I've been a manager for over a decade. And wow. Some of the folks that started under me when I first became a GM, now they're managers themselves, they're group managers themselves, and they're on their path to director. And I mean, it's just been so amazing to see all these leaders that I had a role to play in their development. And then after I became a group manager, then Rova-Sys is a pretty flat organization. So you just go group manager to director. Director then, so 5 years ago, Rova-Sys really looked at, we were celebrating our 30-year anniversary, and we looked at, well, here we've been, this is what we've done for the last 30 years. What's the next 30 years look like? And so one of those things that we said was we really need to be we're not afraid to be on the kind of the tip of the spear. And so we said, we need to be on the cutting edge of this AI thing. And so I was fortunate enough to be named the director of this division 5 years ago. And so now I've been doing this industrial AI thing ever since. So that's kind of, I guess, my story.
I love it. Now. That's awesome, man. That's a great story. And so many things that I want to go back and unpack with you. How'd you select University of Akron? If I remember correctly, there was a story behind that, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, so I'm a Gen Xer, and I think a lot of Generation X have a lot of things in common. One is that I didn't grow up with a ton of money. So I ended up paying for college myself, which I think also is kind of a common story amongst Gen Xers. And so it was the cheapest public school in the state, I think at the time. I don't know that it still is. And I had grown up about 25 minutes away from the University of Akron. So yeah, it just was like, again, I knew what I wanted to do. So it wasn't like I love, the Ohio State University and some of these great schools we have in Ohio, but I didn't need to do that. I knew what I wanted to do. I just needed the piece of paper. So it was like, let me find the cheapest school and go get my CS degree, my computer science degree from there. And what was interesting was that, so my wife actually grew up in Ohio too, but she grew up on the western side of Ohio. She ended up picking the University of Akron for two reasons. She got recruited to swim there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they were starting a Division I swim program at the University of Akron. She didn't end up swimming there, but that was her plan, was to swim there. So that was why she was there. And then it was also very near where her grandparents lived, which was in Akron. And so that was kind of how the two of us met, was there. But that was how I picked it.
And that's the Zips, right?
Go Zips. Yep.
Go Zips. All right. And did that decision to go to University of Akron, has that shaped your career at all? Has it had an impact going there versus potentially going other places?
Well, I mean, career-wise, I think it prepared me as best as any college program can. So I think they have a great program there. I mean, a lot's changed. It's been 20 plus years. And it's actually a really cool school now. I mean, when I went there, I guess my perspective on it was a very pragmatic education. When I went there, it didn't even look really like what it did today. But man, you could say that about a lot of colleges, right? I mean, it's just a whole different experience when you see these campuses nowadays. When I went there, it was very much still a heavy commuter school. It was right in the middle of downtown Akron. It was kind of a different experience. So it was a very pragmatic experience. It was like, it wasn't about the quote unquote college experience. It was about a lot of people just trying to get their degree and get on to their career. And so that was kind of my experience there.
I love it. I mean, I did my graduate degree at University of Ohio down in Athens.
Yeah, Athens. Yeah.
And that, I think, goes for a lot of those schools, and a lot of the mindset in the Midwest there is just very pragmatic, very practical. I'm not here to rage. I'm not here to I mean, Athens, they do party quite hard, which it might be a school that I do not encourage either of my children to go to just for that fact, but I digress. But I think a lot of the schools in the Midwest have that practical, pragmatic approach, right? Where people want to just get their degrees. They want to move on to their careers. They're not looking for a whole lot of pomp and circumstance. And unless they're going to the Notre Dames, Ohio State universities, et cetera. So I love that. And I love the practical approach. So going back to after you graduated and you joined Rova-Sys, how do you think the programming of those early MES systems, how do you think that's affected your outlook, your approach to manufacturing and AI today?
Well, it was such a cool opportunity to get to start there in my career, because when you look at MES systems, they touch every aspect of a manufacturing business, right? So there you're going to have aspects of goods produced and inventory consumed, and you're going to be tracking recipes, and you're going to be looking at all the way to packaging and warehousing. I mean, MES has such a big footprint within a manufacturing space. So I really got exposed to all aspects of it. The other thing that was really cool about it at the time, and again, things have changed and there's more out of the box solutions and things like that. But what was really cool was it was a programmer's dream, because you got to come in and sit down with a customer and say, what exactly do you want? And then we got to build a solution that did exactly what they wanted. In a lot of ways, it was a very rare privilege, even then in programming, and still today, to be able to do that. When people think of that's kind of what you want to be able to do in programming.
Sure.
But the reality of it is that you're almost always, if you're either working for a product company, so you're going to be supporting existing code bases that have been around for a long time, or you're going to be working in an internal IT team, and again, you're going to be faced with supporting large code bases that have been around for a long time, that have not changed in a long time, and that's kind of what you do as a programmer. That's what you end up doing. So this ability to sit down with a customer and design out exactly what they wanted and then build that from scratch was such a cool opportunity. I don't forget how awesome of an opportunity that was provided to me to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's super rare.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand, I mean, I am not in your space and will not pretend to be, but usually you don't get that opportunity to custom tailor, especially nowadays where you can just Google and 9 times out of 10, you'll find something that fits enough of your need,
Yeah,
right?
right. And maybe you're just customizing it, or yeah, a little bit, that out of the box solution you're customizing and stuff, but that it just didn't exist. There weren't those types of things back when I
Yeah.
started.
That's awesome. There was a show on A&E, and I forget the name of it now, but it was all about early days programmer, and it was fascinating to watch that show. I don't remember what it is. If I can think of it, I'll send it to you.
It wasn't Halt and Catch Fire, was it?
Yes, I loved that show.
Okay.
What did you think from your perspective?
Yeah, I didn't get to see the show, but a friend of mine was telling me about. I don't know if it was that show that you were talking about, but he was like, man, you got to watch this, because this was the early days, and I think that it's a very natural progression for the programmers of today. Probably would have been the engineers of yesterday, right? So some of the folks who we've had people retire from Rova-Sys. They spent almost their whole career here, and in the early days they were still like soldering boards and stuff like that, right? I mean, that was, you know what I mean? Like real, like embedded systems, because you couldn't buy an off the shelf component to do that for some particular manufacturer. So you were building a board from scratch. We don't do any of that anymore, right? I mean, there's just not a call for it. There's no reason there. First off, I don't want to be in charge of supporting that board 24/7 and making sure it doesn't break in the field, and we don't get a call in the middle of the night for that board. But there's also just such a number of off the shelf components that you can actually buy for that.
Cool. Awesome. So, Bryan, you've spent over 2 decades at one company, and in this day and age, that is almost unheard of, right? 24 years, that's a long time to spend with one organization. It's very unique, especially for a Gen Xer, a younger Gen Xer too, right? I mean, I'm 79. You're a younger Gen Xer, and we don't typically do that. So, what's kept you at Rova-Sys for so long, and what are some key moments there that have shaped that journey?
Yeah, so it is rare, and I don't necessarily want to turn this whole thing into a commercial for my company, but it is a really great company to work for. And one of the things that I think other companies could learn from a culture perspective is that anytime that I got to a point in my career where I was like, I just don't know that I can do this anymore. I'm kind of tired of doing the same old thing. Every time, inevitably, Rova-Sys had a new challenge for me. And they'd say, well, have you thought of doing this? Or have you considered trying this? Again, when I started to get bored with the technical, they were like, have you considered managing people? Every time they always have a new challenge for me. And so that's something that I try to pay forward And so now for the folks who work for me, I try to do the same thing. And so anytime they start, I start seeing that look in their eyes, like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. Maybe I should be looking somewhere else, blah, blah. That's the time when I start trying to find new challenges for them. So I think that that was part of it. And I can remember specific moments when that happened. But the other thing that they always did was that they always gave me those opportunities, and they always did it. Sometimes it was before I thought I was ready, but it was never before they thought I was ready. So as soon as they thought I was ready, regardless of what I thought, they challenged me with a new opportunity. So when I got the opportunity to architect a whole system myself, a whole MES system by myself, they knew I was ready to do it, but it may not have been, I don't know that I would have thought that I was ready at that point. And so in doing that, oftentimes folks at Rova-Sys get those opportunities earlier. So we're oftentimes, I'll say, it's kind of become a cliche, is that the Rova-Sys people in the room are typically the youngest people in the room. And we tend to, we hire really driven people. We hire really talented people. We hire them right out of college, and we kind of get them to drink the Kool-Aid, and we kind of get them, into the program right from the beginning. And in doing that, we end up preparing them in such a way that, they're typically the youngest folks in the room. And I remember being, and not so much anymore, but I remember being the youngest person in the room. But it was such a cool opportunity. And when I look at my peers, or when I look at other folks at other companies, I find that oftentimes it's 5 to 7 years later before, those folks have gotten the same opportunities that our folks have gotten. So I think from that aspect, that just always resonated with me. I'm a very driven person from that standpoint. And so always looking for the next challenge. And they always were there for me with that next challenge.
Awesome. And you talked right there about the youth that you have, and I think you see a lot of that in industries like technology, like software, but we're also starting to see a lot of the younger generation in manufacturing itself as a vertical. What have you learned about leadership, mentorship, and mentorship through your experiences with these younger people there on site?
So much. When you work for a company where 90+% of our new hires are right out of college, you better believe you're going to be facing some generational gap type of issues. And you better believe that you better figure out, especially when you're in management and you're the person who's supposed to develop them and you're supposed to lead them, you're going to find out real fast the differences between the generations and how they're motivated and what gets them up out of bed every morning, because it's not the same. And arguably, it wasn't the same for the boomers. When I got hired into this company, it was primarily boomers running it. And I was this Gen Xer, this snot-nosed kid who thought he knew everything about everything, right? And my father-in-law has a great line, hire the young while they still know everything. And I get that now.
I like that.
I get
I
that
need
now.
that on a t-shirt.
Exactly.
I need that on a t-shirt.
I get
Absolutely.
it. So and I didn't get it right at the first time, and I'll tell you, a great resource that I found, that Simon Sinek, and it's almost kind of become cliche to point to him as this leadership guru, but in the early days, one of the things that he did really well was he demystified the millennials, and they were this big mystery, right? How do we reach the millennials? I've now managed millennials. I've got managers that are millennials. So I managed millennials for a while now. And there's a couple things that are different about them and how they're motivated. One of them is that they're high touch. They require more touch. They require more hands-on type of feedback. They want more feedback from you. And they need it delivered in a way that was, just different. It's just different than the boomers and the Gen Xers. I was able to take feedback that was delivered sometimes very crass, sometimes very, there was no compliment sandwich from the boomers. The boomers just said, you're not performing at the level that you need to be, and you need to get your rear end in gear, in very colorful language. And that was okay for me. That I was able to take that and I was able to work with that. That's not okay for the millennials and the Gen Zs. Like, they need it presented in a different way. It's not to say that they can't, I think there's also a lot of stereotypes, and I think that they get a lot of bad rap. It's not to say that they're not willing to take, criticism, and that they're not willing to become better, and that they don't want to be better. But you do have to deliver that feedback in a way that they can hear it. But again, honestly, I'm just saying things. You have to deliver any message that you want somebody to hear, you have to deliver it in a way that they can hear it, that they're able to absorb that message. So if
Yep.
you're just going to say, well, I'm telling them this thing, and I've been married for a long time too. If you're just going to say, I'm saying this thing, I don't understand why you're not understanding it. Shame on you. Like, it's not
Yeah.
enough when you're communicating to just say, well, I'm saying the right words in the right order. No, you have to deliver it in a way where somebody can actually receive that message. So, okay. So they have to hear feedback in a way that they can actually receive it. And they need high touch. The other thing that's important, and I think that there's a certain amount of inspiration that we can take from millennials. The other thing that is different about them is that they've got a bigger worldview than I think Gen Xers ever had.
Absolutely.
And we were able to just kind of be head down and kind of grind it out over the years, and it was okay for us. For them, they want to see that what they're doing is connected to a broader worldview and into a broader mission. And
Yep.
Simon Sinek, with his book Start With Why, which I love and have really adopted in the way that I manage. So I start with why with them. From the very first day, I talk to them about the impact that manufacturing has on the world. And it's made me, in some ways, bigger proponent for manufacturing than I was even before I started managing millennials, because now I had to reflect and see where manufacturing lies.
Mm.
And so I'm now this big advocate for manufacturing. And I say to people that manufacturing is the biggest lever that we can pull to provide true prosperity for the most people. There is no bigger lever that you can pull than the lever of manufacturing. When you have access to more things that are of high quality, that cost you less, that are available on demand. I mean, we live like kings. Like, we live better than any king that ever existed, right? We live today. Now, it may not make you happy. That's a whole nother thing, right? That's philosophy, and you can talk about the path to happiness and
Right.
contentment. But when you talk about prosperity, we are more prosperous now. There's no question we're more prosperous now than we've ever been. And manufacturing is at the absolute heart of that. It's the heartbeat of any economy. It's such an
Yeah.
important thing. So I try to connect that to those folks so that they see where they fit in the broader landscape. But I mean, it's not lip service. Like, they actually, I mean, they'll take, money is not a big motivator for them. Like,
No.
they want to know that what they're doing is having an impact on people. And so that's been really inspiring. And then Gen Zers have been a whole different challenge. And they're, and I'm still kind of decoding that and figuring out how to best manage Gen Zers. The point is that it's silly to, when you're in these leadership roles, it's silly to sit back and say, well, I wish they were motivated by the same things that I was. Well, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
they're not. So, just take on the challenge of figuring out how best to lead those people. And the other aspect of it is, it's no different than the fundamental aspect of leadership that people discover. And that's that different people are motivated by different things. So I could put 3 different millennials in front of you, and each one of them is going to need to be led in a slightly different way. That's
Absolutely.
part of being a leader, is figuring out what the levers are. It's so funny when I first discovered that, because it was like, I have these levers, these motivators, and when I pull these levers for this person, it gets them moving and gets them pumped up and excited. And I'm pulling these same levers over here for this person. And not only is it not working, it's having the opposite effect of what so part of being a leader is just figuring out what motivates different people and how to get them excited and passionate, and aligning those incentives so that everyone starts marching in the same direction.
I love it. Yeah. Very insightful. I mean, you look at, again, our generation, Gen X, the baby boomers led with one lever, right?
Yeah.
There was one motivator, and
It's
that
kind of a
was
stick.
Yeah. There was no carrot or a stick. It was just a stick.
It was just kind of a stick.
Yeah. And now, the millennials, we do have to lead with the carrot a little bit more than the stick. And I talk to groups that I facilitate leadership development for, and talk to them about how Gen Z is almost a nurture. You can't you can't lead with a carrot. You have to nurture them. And it's very foreign to those leaders who are baby boomers that are looking at wrapping up their career in that leadership position. It's tough for Gen Xers to really grasp. But I'm finding millennials have an easier time leading that next generation. those Gen Zers, and so maybe it's just a not skipping multiple lines to get to that. I don't know. But you talked a little bit about challenges with that. Speaking of challenges, let's talk a little bit about how Rova-Sys changed directions a little bit and decided to go with this AI direction. Walk us through that shift and the challenges that you experienced with AI 5 years ago, which, you know, it existed, but we weren't talking about it as much as we have been in the last 2 years. I mean, my iPhone has had Siri, which is AI, since iPhones came out, right? But people just started talking about generative AI in such a different way. So, talk to us about your challenge taking on that, and what about AI really excites you when it comes to manufacturing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. So I guess let's start with, we, you know, and when I say that, we didn't really shift so much in that we were adding these capabilities on. So we still do everything that we
Okay.
used to do 30 years ago. That's still, but part of that, and not to get too inside baseball, but for your listeners, control system integration, controllers or the fundamental smart thing on the plant floor. They're the thing that charges up reactors or moves things on conveyors. They're the thing that makes the decision. In fact, I typically describe, if you've seen the show How It's Made, the controllers are the things on the plant floor that make everything move, everything work, right? That's a controller. And programming those things has been the realm of system integrators for a long time, and that's what we have always done and will continue to do. But there is a certain aspect of that is going to become commoditized. And so we were looking at 5 years ago, we were saying, what's the next thing? What are we going to be able to continue to push ourselves, push our customers, and continue to add value for our customers? And so we looked at three different areas, actually. So, industrial AI was only one of them. The other two was industrial networking. So if your listeners remember, 2009 was the first ever control system virus, a virus released on a plant floor, and it was called Stuxnet. And that changed the whole landscape and our whole thought around securing the plant floor and cybersecurity around the plant floor, which was not really in the conversation before
No.
2010.
Yeah.
And so we started 5 years ago. We also started an industrial networking group. And then the last one we started was actually an MES group, ironically enough, to start to take advantage of all the off-the-shelf capabilities that existed now, as well as to kind of push the envelope around thinking big picture around all the people, processes, and technology that encompass what we traditionally have called MES. So those were the three initiatives we started 3 years ago, and or 5 years ago, and we're still going strong. But let's talk about the industrial AI one, because you're absolutely right. When I started, the presidents, so we have co-presidents at Rova-Sys, and the presidents sat me down and they said, we're thinking about, for your initiative, we're thinking about industrial AI. Now, what do you think about that? And I said, wow, again, 5 years ago, it was like, are we too early? Are we too early on this? I don't know. I'm not saying no, but I'm just saying, is this the right angle to go? And they said, well, why don't you go off? This is typical Rova-Sys response. Well, you go off and do some research and you tell us, what you think. And so I came back, and part of that was I had a couple meetings with some customers of ours that were, that we have a real good relationship with. And we were like, hey, we're thinking about starting this thing. What do you think about that? And they go, I remember this one. It was a glass customer of all things. And this glass customer, which is not like an industry that we think of as like cutting edge, right? Whatever. But so this glass customer, they're like, well, wait right here. And so he brings in two data scientists this is 5 years ago, that he had working for him. And they're like,
Wow.
so I hear that, they said, I hear Rova-Sys is thinking about getting into industrial AI. They're like, now, have you thought about, are you going to go after decision trees or neural networks? And then he starts rattling off all these different algorithms and stuff. I go, okay, all right. So what that told me was that we're not too early, because when we've got customers that are already starting to make those investments internally, that told me that, okay, we're starting to go down the right path here. And the other thing that told me that was I started to look for vendors. So again, we're a system integrator. So we integrate systems. We build a solution out of typically multiple vendor products that solves a problem. That's what we do. And so I started to look for vendors in this space, because that's always the next thing we do as a system integrator is, who are the vendors we're going to partner with? And I found, even 5 years ago, I found all these AI vendors in our space, in the industrial space. There's plenty of AI vendors in, the IT space, finance and all that. But truly, vendors who were targeting the industrial and manufacturing space. I found all these vendors and I said, okay, well, we're not too late. Might be a little early to the party, but we're definitely, or I should say, we're not too late, we're not too early. It was time to strike. And so we also felt like we were in a unique position there because we had been working in this industrial space for so long. And one of the challenges we heard from our customers was that we've got a data science team and they've come up with some really cool models, but nobody knows how to put those models into production on the plant floor. I'm like, well, that's definitely something we know how to do. Like, we can operationalize these things. That's what we've been doing. Operationalizing technology on the plant floor is what we've been doing forever. So I really felt like we also had a unique angle in that regard, in that we could operationalize these AI models on the plant floor, which is a whole different ballgame. When you talk about putting an AI model in the IT space versus in the carpeted space versus on the plant floor that's got to run 24/7. And you've got to, one of the things that I always tell customers is until somebody on the plant floor is taking an action based on that prediction or what that model is telling you, until that happens, you haven't seen a lick of ROI. Everything else that went up to that point has been a giant science experiment. Until it's actually in operation on the plant floor and someone's taking action on it, that's when you start to see ROI. And so what are the obstacles that stand, in the way of that? Yes, running 24/7. How about, has anyone thought about retraining? Every model drifts over time. Have people thought about the retraining and redeployment that's going to be required? And then finally, have people thought about the organizational change management? You've got to get these operators who have learned over the years to trust their instincts and their guts, and they know when this piece of equipment's running right or wrong. Like, they can just hear it. They just know, today she's really giving us a hard time versus, oh, she's running hot today, this is going to be a good day, right? They just know that. And you're going to try to tell this operator, okay, forget all of those instincts you've developed over the years. You're now going to use this AI model, and that's what's going to tell you when this machine's, having issues. That's organizational change management. And so there's all those aspects of it too that make it a unique challenge. November of 2022, suddenly the world is introduced to generative AI in the form of ChatGPT, right? Now, suddenly, leading up to that, I'm still going into meetings and AI is maybe in the back of their head, maybe, or they're like, it's not really time for us. Thanks, but no thanks, right? I'm having those types of reactions from customers. Suddenly now my phone's ringing off the hook and every customer is saying, we need to be doing AI. The CEO is telling me that I got to be doing more with AI. What are we doing with AI? And so now suddenly, the 2023, 24 has been great years for AI because all these people are really excited about it. Now, I will also say I've got some strong opinions, which we can get into or not, but I've got some strong opinions about generative AI and the role that it should play today versus the role it should play in the future. So in a lot of ways, while it's been a door opener to, and people are excited about generative AI, we oftentimes pivot the conversation pretty quickly to here's what we can deliver today versus here's what the future of AI is going to.
So what are those personal philosophies on AI? And I guess, my biggest question for you in regards to that is, what is your belief? What are your thoughts on how AI can affect the humans of manufacturing, right? The humans, that base that is the backbone, the heartbeat of a thriving economy.
Yeah. Well, so I think there's a lot of ways. Now, there's a lot of fear and trepidation that comes with AI, right? And one of the most common questions I get is are you putting people out of work? Well, I can tell you right now, I'm not, because the most recent, in fact, I just looked at it this morning, Bureau of Labor Statistics, the most recent numbers is that there's about 500,000 labor shortfall in terms of manufacturing. So they can't find enough people to do these jobs. And you kind of get it. It's not the sexiest job in the world, right? If you're an operator on a line, it's kind of a monotonous job and kind of tedious. And there also is a generational aspect to that. Like, so even when they find people, and I'm telling you, this is what I'm hearing directly from my customers over and over again, is that even if they can find people to operate these lines, they have high turnover. The folks, they're 6 months to 1 year and they're gone. The people that they're replacing are folks who have spent over a decade, 15, 20 years running these lines and know every aspect of it and know how to squeeze every little ounce of efficiency out of this line. And those are the people who are retiring.
Right.
I talked to a vinyl manufacturer up in Canada, and he said that I've got two guys that are absolute experts at running this vinyl extrusion line. And he said both of them are less than 5 years from retirement. And he's like, and I've got
Wow.
no bench. I've
Yeah.
got high turnover. I got 6-month guys, and none of them are really that interested in spending the next decade of their career learning how best to operate this vinyl extrusion line. It just doesn't exist. So in a lot of ways, the people aspect of it is that we're trying to upskill those folks who are on that line and get them to be better at operating that line. Well, how do we do that? So we have it's kind of a unique offering for Rova-Sys. There's only a handful of SIs in the world that can offer this, and it's called autonomous AI. And autonomous AI, it leverages a technology called deep reinforcement learning, but autonomous AI actually does what people want AI to do. And that's that it actually can look at the state of the system and it can say, here's your next best move. Here's the next best thing that you can do. And so we're using that to actually solve operational problems on the plant floor. And one of the aspects of autonomous AI, it's really more a methodology. It's not like a product, it's more of a methodology. But part of that methodology is called machine teaching. And machine teaching that's the part of the project where we actually sit down with those experts, those expert operators, and we actually capture all of those skills in the AI.
Wow.
We teach it how humans know best to do this part of the process, right? And we capture all of the little tricks and tips. They'll say, well, when the line's running hot, I tend to do this. And when the line's running cool, I tend to do this. And so we capture all of that. It ends up looking kind of like a workflow when we're done.
Yeah.
A flow chart. And that's actually what we feed into the model to kind of that we prime the pump with that. And then we go, okay, now find all of the ways that humans have not thought to do it. Wow. And become an expert. And so we train it. It trains typically for roughly about a day, typically for a typical autonomous AI model. So it's heavyweight training. But by the time it's done, it's like it's been a 30-year operator on that part of the process. And
that's
now
amazing.
It really is. I mean, it's like magic. And so then we can deploy that autonomous AI, we call it a brain. The neural network trained this way is called a brain. So we can actually deploy that brain, and it can look over the shoulder of that 6-month guy, and it can say, hey, now what you want to do when you're in this state is you want to turn this knob a little bit this way, and you want to turn this knob a little bit this way, and you're going to squeeze more performance out of it. Or here's how to get out of a tricky situation. It knows how to do all that because it's like a 30-year operator. And it's so exciting because the folks who are retiring, sitting down with them, one of the other questions I get is do you get pushback from those folks? Like, do you find that they don't want to reveal their secrets? Exact opposite. They're so excited to explain, because we sit down with humility and we say, teach us everything that you know about how best to run this line. They've spent their entire career becoming experts at this. Like, this is their passion. And I always say, who else is going to ask them that? The guys at the bar, when they get off their shift, they don't want to hear anything more about running a vinyl extrusion line. Their wives for sure don't want to hear anything more about it. And here we come, and we're sitting down and we're saying, teach us everything you know. And they really see it as their legacy. And so, we now have captured those skills in Silicon. They'll never be lost again. We can apply those. So when I talked about, we'll come in and the folks will want to talk about generative AI, and I can tell you my opinions on that. But what we typically pivot to pretty quickly is this autonomous AI, because I'm like, this exists today and it can solve real operational problems that you have on the plant floor today. And by the way, not for nothing, I can capture all that expertise before you lose those folks to retirement. I can capture all that expertise before they walk out the door.
So you've created Mentor, an AI mentor for youth in manufacturing or new hires in manufacturing. I mean, that's astronomical.
Yeah.
I do want to hear your thoughts on AI, but do you think that this has stemmed from your appreciation of mentoring people within your own leadership sphere, right? Creating that kind of a product?
Well, I'd like to take that kind of credit for it, but really we stumbled into it. So Microsoft Research actually was really kind of a pioneer around this autonomous AI approach. And they actually reached out to Rova-Sys as well as a handful of other system integrators in this space, because they were like, we've got this really cool thing, but we know that we need more experts who know what to do with it. And so they really pioneered it. And then we got trained by them on that. And so, but I will say that the first time I saw it in action, I was absolutely floored. And I said, this is unique. This is something that does not exist in our space. And this will be an inflection point. We will look back and say that when autonomous AI was introduced into the manufacturing space, that was an inflection point for the industry, because nothing like that existed before then. And so, what we call it is a decision support system. So it's monitoring. So we hook it up to the control system. So we start read only. So it's just reading the control system. That's its senses. That's how it knows what's happening. And it's monitoring every decision that the person's making, and it's making decision support. So it's saying, hey, I would recommend doing this. I'd recommend doing that. If they don't do it, no big deal. It changes its, its direction, and then it'll give you the next best thing you can do in this new state that the process is in. The other thing that I really like about it is it's a single technology that can solve a lot of problems within the manufacturing space. So we've used this same thing for controlling, doing fine-tuned controlling of a glass bottle making process, all the way to production scheduling. It can act like a production scheduler too, and it was for a paint manufacturer. So basically, when we first talk to customers about where best to apply this, we say, where do you have humans making decisions right now where you can see a material difference between how an expert solves that problem and how kind of a newbie solves that problem? Those are the types of problems that we want to attack with this autonomous AI approach.
And so to me, this is what people want out of AI. It's not pictures of, shrimp carrying the Christ the Redeemer and stuff like that, right? Like, the generative AI has devolved society, I think, to a certain aspect. Tell me your opinions on it.
Well, okay. So here's my opinion on generative AI. So first, let me preface by saying that there's no question it's made a huge impact on society. It will continue to make a huge impact on society. And there's also no question in my mind that there will come a day, and it may only be in a couple years, where manufacturing will need to start to adopt this generative AI. However, there is a significant problem that not enough people are talking about with applying generative AI to the types of problems we have on the plant floor. And that problem, if your listeners aren't familiar, is called hallucinations. So let's talk about what hallucinations are. And some people will know this already. And I've got a perfect example of this. So I went into ChatGPT a couple months ago, and I said to ChatGPT, I said, can you name the 13 dwarves from the Disney classic Snow White? Now, we all know there were not 13 dwarves.
I was going to say, that number doesn't ring a bell.
Exactly.
Did I miss some? Yeah.
Right. There were 7. So ChatGPT says, yeah, absolutely, I can do that. And it gives me this nice numbered list, and it lists out the first 7 were the 7 dwarves that we all know and love. And then it listed 6 more. And it was like, I don't remember what it was. They were ridiculous.
Wow.
But if you didn't know any better, you would think that there were 13 dwarves in the original. It wasn't like the extra 6 stood out like a sore thumb. They looked exactly like the types of names you would associate with dwarves from the movie. And so that's a problem. That's a big problem, right? Now, if all you're doing is generating a term paper or a marketing blurb or whatever, who cares? Like, everyone kind of laughs at that, and that's fine. But on the plant floor, we can't have that. You could kill somebody, right?
Yes.
So one of the most important, or one of the most significant use cases that all these generative AI vendors keep pushing is this idea of, we're going to solve your maintenance headaches, your maintenance problems, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to build a model, and we're going to train it on all of the SOPs and all the manuals and all the maintenance records and all the knowledge that you have written down of how best to fix this equipment and maintain this equipment. And by the way, those maintenance guys are retiring too. So we're losing all of that expertise too. I mean, there's a kernel of truth to this, right? And so we're going to train this model. And so you're going to have a maintenance chatbot. And so what's some young maintenance person going to do who doesn't know any better? They're going to put in and they're going to say, hey, do you know how to fix this piece of equipment? And here's what generative AI has a really hard time doing right now, saying, I don't know, right? It's not built to say, I don't know. And so what it's going to do is it's going to generate an answer, regardless of the accuracy of that. So it's going to make stuff up. That's what hallucinations are. It just makes stuff up. And so it's going to say with complete authority, it's going to say, I know exactly how to fix that piece of equipment. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to torque that nut and you're going to rev these RPMs and you're going to put this in here and you're going to put this liquid in there. And then you're going to boot this piece of equipment up and it's going to run great. And you could blow up the plant. You could kill somebody, right?
Wow.
Because the very person who wouldn't know any better to question that is the person who we're putting this tool in front of. Right? If we had the person who knew better, that would, you wouldn't need the tool. So, okay. So hallucinations are a non-starter on the plant floor. Can't happen. And so it's not like the LLM researchers don't know this is a problem, right? And so listeners of this are going to be screaming at their radio right now, and they're going to say, no, we've got the solution to that. And it's called RAG. I don't know if you've heard of RAG. But this is the suggested solution to hallucinations. RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And what that means is that you basically force the model to cite its work. So you say that you aren't allowed to say anything if you can't point to chapter and verse of here's the PDF that you found that information in, right? And so with every response, you get like a link to a PDF and you can click on it and it'll take you right to the line that it thinks that it read that. Okay, so you can double check its work. On the surface, sounds like perfect. We found the solution. Let's go move forward with this. Now, here's the problem with RAG. So the typical RAG architecture looks like this. The prompt's going to come in. It's going to get parsed. It's going to be sent in parallel to the LLM engine, to the model. That's going to give you the natural language response. And in parallel, it's going to be sent to an enterprise search module. And that's what's going to look up to cite the source. That's what it's going to look up where potential, not even guaranteed, but potential documents that may have a response that corresponds. And then there's going to be a validator that's going to combine the natural language response with those links to those documents, and then the final prompt response to the user. Now, here's the problem with that RAG architecture, is it relies on enterprise search. Okay. Now, I don't know when the last time you've searched for something on your enterprise and what kind of results you got, right? But did you get it the first time? Was it the top result? Did you get it the second time? Did you finally give up and recreate that document that you couldn't find, right? Okay. Enterprise search. When I was at a conference, I think it was a year and a half ago, when I first saw a presentation on RAG, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. They finally fixed hallucinations. I got really excited. And then they got deeper into the presentation. They showed this architecture. I go, wait, stop. You're telling me this whole thing relies on enterprise search, something that we've spent decades trying to solve that problem and have not been able to come up with a good solution for enterprise search, and this whole RAG thing relies on that? Wow. Sorry. No, guys. I got news for you. If we had high quality, accurate enterprise search, we could get right to, honestly, we probably wouldn't even need the chat bot. We would just be able to, right? We don't have that, and we've never had that. And Google built a whole business around trying to provide the best search. And even that's not accurate 100% of the time. And you're telling me that that's going to be the back, and you're not going to have access to Google, by the way, I'm telling you that, right? You're going to have a clunky enterprise search that's always existed in your corporate environment. And that's what you're going to hook up to this thing. And you're going to expect to get the types of results. Wow. So no, I'm sorry. RAG doesn't solve it either. All right. So I'm going to get off my soapbox here, but the point is,
I've enjoyed it.
that we'll get there. There's no question we'll get there, but generative AI right now on the plant floor is a non-starter. You want to use it in the carpeted space and solve some knowledge type of problems up there? Great. Love it. Go for it. But if it has an impact to life, limb, property, like the types of problems we have down on the plant floor, you cannot allow it down there. And honestly, even the AI vendors know this. They talk a big game, but when you press one of these AI vendors that is pushing generative AI and you say, is this really supported in a scenario where I could kill someone? The answer is no. They're going to say, no, don't use it there. Nope, we can't support that. So
that might be the clip of the episode. I might use that as like, it's not necessarily your story, but that's a huge knowledge bomb that you just dropped
yeah,
on these
they
folks
know.
here.
They
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
So I want to go back a little bit to talking about leadership and mentoring and the youth and all of that. This is a manufacturing culture podcast. And I always like to ask my guests, what does culture really mean to you? Right. And so how do you think that culture plays a role in driving innovation and keeping your teams engaged?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of aspects to culture. So there's a lot of things that kind of get lumped under that culture umbrella. I think that um, it's interesting because I think we do a really good job of that at Rova-Sys, but it's also one of those things where if you ask a fish about what water is, they're going to say, what are you talking about? Right. Because
Right.
we just live it and breathe it. And so it's sometimes hard to kind of zoom out and really identify what are the differentiators? Why are we so good at this culture thing? I think that part of it is expectation setting and expectation management. I think one of the things that some companies don't understand is that it's okay to have high expectations. Yes, even for millennials and Gen Z, yes, have high expectations for them. But the difference is if you just have a high expectation and then you say, yeah, figure it out, all you are is
Yeah.
a tyrant at that point, right? What the good leaders do is they set high expectations and then they coach those people up to those expectations. They coach people up. And so I think that that's such an important aspect of leadership. I think it's an important aspect of culture. We also have a saying here I don't know where this came from. We probably didn't invent it, but it's if you see a snake, kill a snake. Don't create a committee on snakes.
I
Right?
like it. It
Right?
sounds like an old like Tibetan
Yeah.
something or other,
Don't
right?
don't create a committee on snakes.
Yeah.
And what that is empower your people to be able to solve problems on their own. Don't require 100 signatures for them to make a decision. Now, there's another aspect to that. The other side of that coin is you can't kick them if they screw up, right? One of the things I've screwed up many times, if you can imagine, over a 20 plus year career here, I've screwed up many times. I've cost this company a lot of money. I don't take that lightly, right? But here's the difference. There are companies where you screw up big time and you're out the door, right? It's not even a judgment call. I'm sorry, man. You screwed up. You can't cost us that kind of money. You're out the door, man. I'm sorry. You no longer work here. I'm sorry, right? That's the exact opposite of how we do things here at Rova-Sys. If you screw up, we're like, you're never going to do that again, are you? You're like, no, I'm never going to do that again. Those are the people that you want to keep because they just learned one of the biggest lessons of their career by screwing up. Doesn't mean that there's
Absolutely.
not punishment. It doesn't mean that they don't have to make up for that. Like, yes, all of that, right? You still have to be held responsible for your decisions, right? But you can't punish them. If you're going to empower them to kill snakes when they see snakes, you also can't kick them so hard when they screw up, and they will screw up, right? We hire 90% of our people right out of college, right? They don't know anything. They're going to screw up, right? Put the guardrails in place so that they can't screw up so bad that it's going to cost the company. And then make sure that when they screw up, that you're there to pick them up, help dust them off and say, hey, you're not going to do that again. Oh, I'm not going to ever do that again. Right. I think one of the other key aspects of it is making sure that that you're creating a culture of camaraderie, of collaboration. There's a lot of lip service paid to that, but what that really means, at least here, is that we were all engineers, we were all developers, we all have a certain technical expertise. You should be able to tap anyone on this company, director, GM, president. You should be able to tap anyone on this in this company on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I heard you know everything about X.
Yeah.
Can I pick your brain about that?" And their reaction better be, "Absolutely, yeah. Let's whiteboard it out. Let's spend the next 10 minutes and let's see if we can solve your problem for you." If their reaction is, "You know what? I'm sorry, I don't have time for that right now. I am absolutely underwater." No, you're just going to need to find somebody else. Then that's going to come up in their performance review. That's going to be a conversation with their manager. It is absolutely unacceptable for that to be a response here.
I
So,
love it.
and it all plays into it. I can talk to you about building confidence. I can talk to you about internalized success. It's all these things that these lessons that we try to pass down to the folks here. And I think all of that plays into building a positive.
I love it, man. And unfortunately, we're coming up on time here.
I know.
So, Bryan, as we wrap up, last question I ask every guest. And it sounds like you have so much more to share. Maybe we need to do a part two. Listeners,
Anytime.
viewers, comment below if you want a part two. We'll do also put something out. I think there's a lot more here. But Bryan, what haven't I asked you today that you want to share with the listeners without going into some of those other topics that we may be able to drive a second episode around?
Yeah. What haven't you asked me? I think that, and maybe this would be a teaser for an upcoming episode, but we talked about when opportunity strikes. And my wife has a great saying, and it's that luck is when preparation and opportunity meet.
Mm.
You can't control when those opportunities are going to come, but you can control how prepared you are for it. When I first was presented with the opportunity to become a manager, I didn't feel like I was prepared for it. Now, looking back, having been a manager for over a decade, I was okay. Did I know everything? No, you're never going to know everything. It's never going to be the perfect situation. There's always going to be 100 reasons not to do something, but be prepared. Be constantly learning, be thinking about what would it take to get to that next level? What would that actually look like? And go and read a book on leadership, read a book on managing people and see, because you may end up finding that you're much more prepared and you know far more than you think you do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Bryan, for part one, because we will have a part two here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jim. This was awesome.
Yeah, folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Manufacturing Culture Podcast. And what a journey we've been on today with Bryan DeBois, or DeBois, sorry, from his early days coding on that Commodore 64 to leading what, in my eyes, is an AI revolution in this industry. Bryan's story is absolutely a testament to how passion and persistence and that commitment to grow and learn can transform not just your career, but the careers of the people that you are surrounded by, and frankly an entire industry. We've heard today about his reluctance to step into that leadership role, only to then discover that fulfillment he gets from developing others. We've got a glimpse into the future of manufacturing with AI, autonomous AI, digital transformation, all playing key roles. Bryan's insights on this intersection of technology and culture definitely have resonated with me, and how building the right culture is just as important as implementing that cutting edge technology to success. It's really that reminder to all of us that no matter wherever we are in this journey, we need to empower and enable the people around us to really make a difference. So, Bryan, thank you again for sharing your journey with us. We will do a part two 100%. I appreciate your time and wisdom that you've passed along today. And for everybody who's listening and tuning in, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please do me a massive favor. Share the episode with your friends, your colleagues, your grandma, anyone else who would be inspired by these kinds of insights. And don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps more people discover these stories and the journeys of people in this industry. So before you go, check us out on themfgconnector.com, where you can catch up on all of our past episodes, dive deeper into all things manufacturing and culture. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Geez. Plus, if you're finding solutions and seeing what's next in manufacturing, head over to YouTube. Check out our other show, The Manufacturing Connector. That's where we provide some real novel solutions to problems that manufacturers face in this industry. So again, thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay inspired, and I will see you next time on the Manufacturing Culture Podcast.